No one in the emergency room would touch the disfigured, homeless man. His chart was stamped non-urgent and left at the bottom of the pile for 17 hours. The head surgeon had taken one look at the grime and the torn clothing and made a decision. But that decision was about to be unraveled by a 3-year-old girl in a pink hoodie who would look past the wounds and see a face she remembered. His name was Michael Rhodes, and according to hospital protocol, his condition was stable. But protocol doesn't measure dignity, and it doesn't account for memory. The little girl was Keisha, and she visited her mother, a cafeteria cook, every evening. That night, she would point a small finger toward the gurney and ask a question that would force everyone in that bright, sterile hallway to see what they had chosen to ignore. How does a person disappear in plain sight? And what does it take to make a broken system see him again? To understand how Michael Rhodes ended up alone on that gurney, you need to understand the two worlds that existed inside Mercy General Hospital that night. They operated on the same clock, breathed the same filtered air, but they might as well have been in different cities. In the bright, tiled corridor of the emergency wing, Michael lay still. A thin, gray hospital blanket was tucked loosely around his legs. His face was turned toward the ceiling lights, one side obscured by bandages applied hastily by the ambulance crew. The other side was weathered, the skin around his eye crinkled deep from years of squinting against the sun. He did not ask for water. He did not call out. He had learned over a long time that calling out rarely brought the right kind of attention. The pain in his ribs was a sharp, bright knot with every breath, but it was a familiar kind of hurt. The deeper ache was the chill of the vinyl gurney against his back and the sound of footsteps that always passed by. The decision to bypass him had been made by Dr. Aris Evans, the attending surgeon on the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. Dr. Evans was 39, talented, overworked, and operating on a calculus of perceived urgency. He had glanced at the triage note. Male, approximately 40 to 50, found unconscious near the underpass. Possible assault, multiple contusions, facial laceration, vitals stable. And then he had looked at the man himself. The matted hair, the clothes stiff with dirt and old sweat, the unsteady grip on consciousness that could easily be mistaken for intoxication. In Dr. Evans's mind, a series of rapid, unconscious connections fired. Homeless, likely substance-related, high risk of non-compliance, a drain on resources. He initialed the chart and moved it to the low-priority rack. He did not see a man named Michael. He saw a category. And in a flooded emergency room, categories are how you survive the shift. On the other side of the swinging doors, in the warm, steamy hum of the hospital's basement cafeteria, Janine Williams was loading the last of the industrial trays into the washer. The clock on the wall read 8:17. Her shift had ended at 8, but finishing the closing duties took exactly 23 minutes if she hurried, and Janine always hurried. She was 34, with careful eyes and hands that were permanently slightly red from hot water and bleach. Her life was measured in timed routines. The bus arrived at her stop at 5:15 p.m. She started her shift at 5:45. Her 30-minute break was at 7:25, which was when she would collect Keisha from the after-school program in the hospital's childcare wing, bring her down to the cafeteria, and they would eat together at the small corner table. Keisha was 3 years and 7 months old. She possessed a quiet, observing intelligence and carried a worn stuffed octopus named Blue. Her world was the rhythm of her mother's shift, the smell of disinfectant and steamed vegetables, and the friendly faces of the nighttime custodial staff who would save her packets of jelly. She knew the hallway route from the childcare center to the cafeteria by heart, knew which floor tiles were loose, which drinking fountain was colder. The hospital was not a place of crisis to her, it was her second home. Janine did not know the man on the gurney. She had passed the emergency corridor earlier, pushing a cart of clean trays, and had seen the shape under the blanket out of the corner of her eye. She had felt the usual pinch of sympathy, quickly followed by the practiced wall of detachment. You had to build that wall. Working in a hospital, you saw too much suffering to let every piece of it in. Her own margins were too thin. The rent for their one-bedroom apartment was due in 6 days, and she was $80 short. The transmission in her car made a sound like grinding marbles. Her energy was a finite resource, and she budgeted it with the precision of a banker, spending it only on Keisha and the absolute necessities of survival. A homeless man in the ER was a tragedy, but it was not her tragedy, not tonight. But systems, even cold ones, have cracks, and the first crack appeared at 8:22. Janine, wiping down the last stainless steel counter, realized she'd left her employee badge in the locker room. She couldn't clock out without it. With a sigh, she took Keisha's hand. "Come on, baby, we have to run upstairs quick. Don't touch anything." They took the staff elevator. It opened not into the main lobby, but into a secondary hallway that fed into the emergency wing. It was the backstage route, the one used for moving supplies and bodies. As they turned the corner, Keisha stopped. She wasn't looking at the gurney. She was looking at the floor a few feet away from it, where a small, dirt-smudged canvas bag had been placed, presumably the man's belongings. Protruding from its top was a wooden object, a small, hand-carved bird. A sparrow, its wings swept back as if in flight. Keisha pulled her hand free from Janine's and took 2 steps forward. She pointed, "Mama, bird." Janine, distracted and tired, gently took her shoulder. "I see it, sweetie. It's not ours. Let's go." But Keisha didn't move. She looked from the carved bird on the bag to the bandaged face of the man on the gurney. Her head tilted, a slow, processing gesture, her brow furrowed not in fear, but in the deep concentration of a puzzle being solved. Janine followed her daughter's gaze. She saw the man. She saw the crude, careful bandaging. She saw the way his left hand, dangling slightly off the gurney, was curled loosely, the fingers long and slender despite the grime. And something in the shape of that hand, in the slope of the shoulder under the blanket, triggered a distant, hazy memory. A park, 2 summers ago. A man sitting on a bench, whittling wood, children gathered around him. Keisha took another step, her voice a soft, sure whisper in the quiet hallway. "I know him." Janine's breath caught. The words were simple, absolute. A child's certainty before the world teaches them doubt. In that moment, the wall Janine had built, the category Dr. Evans had assigned, and the 17 hours of neglect all hinged on the recognition in a 3-year-old's eyes. The system was about to be shown a person it had chosen to ignore, and it would start with a single, impossible question. Janine knelt down, her eyes level with her daughter's. "What do you mean you know him, baby? Where from?" Keisha pointed again, not at the man's face, but at his hands. "The park man, the bird man." The words unlocked the memory with sudden, painful clarity. 2 summers ago, the small community park 4 blocks from their old apartment. A man sitting under the old oak tree with a piece of wood and a small knife, a little flock of children sitting cross-legged around him, watching wood turn into wings. He had given Keisha, then barely 2, a small, smooth fox. Janine had thanked him, and he just nodded, his smile quiet behind a thick beard. He'd been clean then, his clothes worn but neat. The man on the park bench and the man on the gurney were separated by years, by grime, by trauma, but the shape of his hands was the same. Janine stood up. The detachment she'd built, the wall of self-preservation, developed a hairline fracture. She looked at the bandages, now seeping a faint rust-colored stain. She looked at the untouched clipboard hanging at the foot of the gurney. 17 hours. She took Keisha's hand and walked, not toward the locker room, but toward the circular nursing station in the center of the emergency wing. A nurse in purple scrubs was typing rapidly, her back to them. "Excuse me," Janine said, her voice firmer than she felt. The nurse, whose badge read L. Carter, RN, didn't turn around. One moment. "The man on the gurney in hallway 3, Janine continued, ignoring the brush-off. "He needs to be seen. His bandages are bleeding through." Nurse Carter finished typing, then swiveled slowly. Her eyes took in Janine's cafeteria uniform, the tiredness in her face, the toddler clinging to her leg. Her expression was professionally neutral, but her tone carried the faint, weary condescension reserved for non-clinical staff. "All our patients are triaged and will be seen in order of medical priority. He's stable." "Stable, he's been lying there for almost a full day. He's in pain, I know him. He's a person, not a chart." The nurse's mouth tightened. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but you're not family and you're not medical personnel. We have protocols. If you have a personal connection, you can wait in the family lounge, but I can't disrupt the entire ER flow because you recognize a homeless patient." The word homeless was delivered like a diagnosis, a final, terminal label. Janine felt a heat rise in her cheeks. She was a cook. She was invisible, but her daughter was not. Keisha, sensing the tension, tugged on Janine's pant leg and spoke directly to the nurse, her small voice cutting through the administrative fog. "He's sad. He needs a band-aid." Nurse Carter's professional mask flickered just for an instant with something like discomfort, but the system was a machine and she was a cog. She softened her voice for the child. "We'll get to him, honey, I promise." Then to Janine, lower, the attending physician, Dr. Evans, made the assessment. "It's his call. Now I really have to get back to work." Janine was dismissed. She stood there for a moment, the hum of the hospital suddenly sounding like a giant, indifferent engine. She looked back down the hall at the solitary gurney. The man's hand twitched. It was a small, involuntary movement, but it was a sign of life, of distress. She made a decision. She would not wait in a lounge. She walked back to the gurney, leaving Keisha a few respectful feet away. She leaned closer. "Sir, can you hear me? It's Janine. We met a long time ago, in the park." His one visible eye fluttered open. The iris was a pale, cloudy blue, bloodshot at the edges. It focused on her with immense effort. His lips were cracked. He tried to speak, but only a dry, rasping whisper came out. No words, just sound. "I'm going to get you some water," Janine said, "and then I'm going to find someone who will actually look at you." She went to the nutrition station at the end of the hall, filled a small cup with water, and brought it back. She supported the back of his head gently, helping him sip. He drank slowly, painfully, but his eyes never left her face. There was a flicker of confusion, then a dawning, agonizing recognition. A tear tracked a clean line through the grime on his cheek. This small act of mercy, this simple human contact, was the second crack in the system, and it was witnessed. Dr. Aris Evans was doing a final round before his shift ended at 7. He was exhausted, his mind already halfway to his car and the silent drive home. He turned into hallway 3 and stopped. The cafeteria worker was at his patient's bedside, helping him drink. The low priority, high maintenance, homeless patient. A surge of irritation, hot and professional, shot through him. This was a breach. This was unsanitary. This was a liability. "Excuse me," Dr. Evans said, his voice sharp in the quiet hall. "What are you doing?" Janine turned, setting the cup down. She didn't flinch. "I'm giving a thirsty man a drink of water, something someone should have done hours ago." "You are not authorized to provide patient care. You're not even family. Step away from the gurney, please." His tone was ice cold, the voice of protocol and hierarchy. Janine did not step away. She stood her ground, a mother lion in cafeteria scrubs. "You left him here. You stamped his chart and you forgot him. My daughter knows him. He's the man who carved toys for kids in the park. He has a name. He's Michael." Dr. Evans's jaw tightened. He glanced at the chart, then back at the man. The name on the triage sheet was John Doe. This woman was introducing facts that complicated a simple, efficient categorization. "That's not confirmed. And even if it is, his medical status hasn't changed. We have critical cases." "Look at him," Janine's voice broke, not with anger, but with a desperate, impassioned plea. "Just look at him, really look." For the first time, Dr. Evans did, not as a problem to be managed, but as a clinical picture. He saw the shallow, rapid breathing he'd attributed to anxiety. He saw the pallor beneath the dirt. He saw the way the man's free hand was pressed protectively against his right side, a classic sign of guarding. The stable vitals on the chart were 2 hours old. Something was wrong. A flicker of doubt, the first seed of a terrible realization, crossed the surgeon's face. His professional arrogance warred with his medical oath. The former told him to dismiss this cook and her emotional interference. The latter whispered that he might have made a catastrophic error in judgment. He reached for the stethoscope around his own neck and took a step forward. "I need to re-examine him. You need to leave, now." Janine moved back, pulling Keisha with her, but she didn't go far. She watched as Dr. Evans, his movements now brisk and tense, listened to the man's chest, palpated his abdomen. The patient, Michael, winced, a sharp intake of breath. Dr. Evans's expression changed. The irritation vanished, replaced by a focused clinical alarm. He turned to the intercom on the wall. "Nurse Carter, I need a trauma team in hallway 3, stat. Possible internal bleeding. Get me an OR on standby." The silent hallway erupted into controlled chaos. Within 60 seconds, the gurney was surrounded, the man was being prepped for surgery, and Dr. Evans was barking orders, a man trying to outrun a mistake. As they wheeled Michael away, Janine caught a final glimpse of his face. His eyes were closed again, but his hand, the one that had carved birds, was clenched tight. The immediate crisis had been triggered, but the deeper one was just beginning. Janine stood in the suddenly empty hallway, holding Keisha, surrounded by the discarded wrappers and the faint smell of antiseptic. She had forced the system to see, but in doing so, she had exposed its failure. And she knew, with a sinking certainty, that systems don't like to be exposed. They protect themselves. The head of hospital administration, a woman named Cynthia Greer, was notified before the sun rose. A John Doe turning into a surgical emergency after a prolonged wait was a problem. A cafeteria worker being the catalyst was a public relations nightmare. By 7:30 a.m., Janine was called into the sterile, quiet office on the executive floor. Cynthia Greer was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Janine, please sit. I understand you were involved in a situation in the ER last night. We are so grateful for staff who care deeply about our patients." It was a trap, velvet-lined and polite. Janine sat back straight. "I just wanted him to get help." "Of course, and he is getting help now, thanks to Dr. Evans's quick action." The narrative was already being rewritten, the neglect erased, the surgeon recast as the hero. "However, we have very strict protocols about non-clinical staff interacting with patients, especially in emergent situations. It's a liability issue for your safety and the hospital." Janine felt the ground shifting beneath her. "Are you saying I did something wrong by getting him help?" "Not at all. We are saying there are channels. You could have spoken to your supervisor, who could have contacted the nursing supervisor. A chain of command exists for a reason." Greer steepled her fingers. "We value you, Janine. You're a reliable employee, but we need to be sure this kind of well-intentioned overstep doesn't happen again. I'm placing a note in your file, and I'm reassigning you to the kitchen prep area for the next 2 weeks. No cafeteria floor duty." It was a demotion, a silencing. Prep work meant lower visibility, no contact with the public or other staff, and a cut in hours. It was a punishment dressed as a precaution. Janine left the office, her stomach in knots. She had done the right thing and was being penalized for it. The message was clear: stay in your lane, know your place. The system would correct its course, and she would be pushed back to the margins. But she had one thing they didn't account for: the truth, and a 3-year-old who had borne witness to it. As Janine collected Keisha from the childcare center, the little girl looked up at her. "Mama, is the Birdman better?" Janine looked down at her daughter's hopeful face, at the innocent faith that speaking up made things better. She thought of Michael being rolled into surgery, of Cynthia Greer's placating smile, of the note in her file. The battle for Michael's dignity had moved from the hallway to the operating room, but the battle for the truth about what happened to him was just beginning. And Janine, with nothing left to lose and everything to prove, realized she was no longer just a cook. She was the only one who remembered the man before he became a John Doe. And she was about to become a problem the hospital couldn't simply reassign. The silence that followed Janine's demotion was the most dangerous kind. It wasn't peaceful, it was the quiet of an institution closing ranks. For the next 48 hours, she worked in the hot, windowless prep kitchen, dicing vegetables and sorting utensils, cut off from the flow of the hospital. Colleagues who used to chat with her now avoided eye contact. The message had been disseminated. Janine Williams was a troublemaker, but in her isolation, a quiet, furious resolve crystallized. She had seen the truth. They couldn't unsee it for her. She used her breaks not to rest, but to research on her phone in the cramped staff bathroom. She looked up the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act. She read about patient dumping settlements where hospitals had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. She learned the term homism, discrimination based on housing status. Every article, every legal precedent was a piece of armor. She wasn't just a cook with a hunch. She was a witness to a systemic failure that had a name and was against the law. Meanwhile, in the surgical intensive care unit, Michael Rhodes was fighting a different battle. The surgery had been more complicated than Dr. Evans anticipated. The stable patient had a lacerated spleen and 2 broken ribs that had been grinding against his lung with every shallow breath for nearly a day. He required 2 units of blood and emerged from anesthesia with a breathing tube, listed in critical but stable condition. Dr. Evans, now his attending physician, visited him with a new, complicated gravity. The man he had dismissed was now his professional responsibility, a living reproach in a hospital bed. On the 3rd day, Janine mustered every ounce of her courage and went to the SICU waiting room. She wasn't family, she had no right to be there, but she sat, with Keisha coloring quietly beside her, a silent statement of her claim to the truth. A social worker, a weary-looking man named Ben, eventually approached her. "You're here for Mr. Rhodes?" he asked, checking a clipboard. "Yes, how is he?" "He's awake, off the ventilator. He's very weak. Are you next of kin?" Janine shook her head. "A friend from a long time ago." Ben sighed, a sound full of bureaucratic hurdles. "I can give him a message, but visitation is restricted to family right now. Hospital policy." It was another wall. But then, from beside her, Keisha held up her drawing, a chaotic, wonderful mess of purple and green lines with a small brown speck in the corner. "For the Birdman," she said. Ben looked at the earnest face of the 3-year-old, then at the determined set of Janine's jaw. The human moment bypassed the protocol. "Give me 5 minutes," he said softly. He returned 10 minutes later, his expression changed. "He'd like to see the artist, both of you, for 5 minutes." They were led into a room that beeped softly. Michael was propped up, his face less swollen but impossibly frail. The bandages were fresh and white. His eyes, however, were clear. They went straight to Keisha, then to Janine. He tried to speak, his voice a papery whisper. "The park," he managed. Janine's eyes filled. He remembered. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Keisha, unfazed by the tubes and machines, walked right up and put her drawing on his blanket. "For you." Michael looked at the drawing, then slowly, with immense effort, lifted his hand, the one not tethered by an IV, and placed it over Keisha's small one. He didn't have the strength to squeeze, but the connection was made. He looked at Janine. "They said a cook argued for me." "They were going to leave you," Janine said, the words tumbling out. I'm so sorry it took so long." He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. When he opened them, a sharp, pained intelligence was there. "Not your fault, theirs." He took a rattling breath. "Need a lawyer." Those 3 words changed everything. They meant Michael understood what had been done to him. He wasn't just a victim, he was a potential plaintiff. Janine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital air conditioning. "Do you have anyone, family?" "No," he whispered. "Just me, was a teacher, long time ago." A teacher, the revelation landed like a stone. This man, carved up by neglect, had once held a classroom's attention. The injustice deepened, becoming personal and profound. Their 5 minutes were up. As they left, Ben, the social worker, stopped Janine in the hall. "He has no insurance, no address. The hospital's billing and administration department is already preparing his discharge packet. He has nowhere to go, and he can't walk." The next phase of the crisis was already in motion, patient dumping, getting him out the door. Janine knew, from her research, that California law required a safe discharge plan for homeless patients, but she also knew those laws were often ignored, with hospitals settling lawsuits later. Michael, weak and disoriented, would be easy to shuffle out. "What happens if he's discharged with nowhere to go?" Janine asked, already knowing the answer. Ben's face was grim. "They'll call a cab to a shelter if one has a bed. Often, they just call a cab to the curb. It's not right, but it happens every day." Janine left the SICU, her mind racing. She had to act. She couldn't afford a lawyer, but maybe she didn't need one yet. She remembered a local advocate she'd read about online, Maria Flores, who ran a nonprofit that documented cases of medical discrimination against the homeless. That evening from her apartment, Janine typed an email. She laid out the facts. The 17-hour wait, the non-urgent stamp, her demotion, Michael's teaching passed, the impending discharge. She hit send, feeling like she'd thrown a message in a bottle into a vast, dark ocean. The response came faster than she dared hope. At 6 a.m. the next morning, her phone buzzed. It was Maria Flores. Her voice was calm, direct, and crackling with purpose. "Janine, I got your email. We need to talk today. And you should know, a reporter from the * Metro Tribune has been sniffing around a tip about a neglect case at Mercy General. Did you talk to anyone?" Janine's heart hammered. "No, I didn't." "Well, someone did, maybe a nurse with a conscience. This is about to get very big, very fast. The hospital will come at you hard. Are you ready?" Janine looked at Keisha, asleep with Blue the octopus. She thought of Michael's hand over her daughter's. She thought of the prep kitchen and Cynthia Greer's placating smile. "I'm ready," she said, and for the first time she believed it. The hospital administration, alerted by their own sources about the reporter's inquiries, shifted from quiet containment to active suppression. Janine was called into Cynthia Greer's office a second time. This time, the velvet gloves were off. "Janine, we've become aware you've been accessing patient areas outside your authorization and are potentially spreading misleading information about a confidential medical case," Greer began, her voice cold. "This is a serious violation of HIPAA and hospital policy. We are placing you on immediate administrative leave, pending an investigation." It was a preemptive strike. Silence her by suspending her, threaten her with legal jargon, take away her income. Janine, armed with the words she'd read on her phone, stood her ground. "I haven't violated HIPAA. I had the patient's permission to visit, and the information isn't misleading. It's documented. His wait time is on the chart. My demotion is in my file, and under EMTALA, what happened to him is illegal." Greer's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected a cafeteria worker to cite federal law. "Your interpretation of the events is not the hospital. We have a team of lawyers, Janine. You have a child to support. I strongly suggest you consider signing this confidentiality agreement and resignation with a modest severance and move on with your life." She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. They were offering her money to disappear, to let them erase Michael Rhodes a second time. Janine didn't touch the paper. "I'm not resigning, and I'm not signing anything." As she walked out, suspended and terrified, her phone rang again. It was Maria. "Meet me at the corner cafe in 1 hour. And Janine, bring everything you have. The reporter is coming too. It's time to tell the story." Sitting in a vinyl booth across from Maria Flores, a woman with kind eyes and a steel-trap mind, and Leo from the Tribune, Janine told the story from the beginning. Keisha's recognition, the dry whisper for water, Dr. Evans's cold dismissal, then his panicked scramble. She showed them the notes she'd taken, the dates, the times. "Leo, the reporter, took careful notes. And you say he was a teacher?" "That's what he told me. Art teacher, I think, given the carving." Maria leaned forward. "We need to verify his identity, his background. It changes the narrative from homeless man neglected to community member, a former educator, abandoned. The hospital counted on him being a nobody. We need to prove he's a somebody." With Michael's verbal permission, obtained through Ben the social worker, Maria began to dig. She used his name, his approximate age, and the former teacher clue. The digital paper trail was faint but findable. She discovered a Michael Rhodes had taught middle school art in a district 2 counties over for 12 years. He left his position 8 years ago. There was no record of why. Next piece came from an unexpected source, Nurse Carter, the one who had first dismissed Janine. She called Maria's nonprofit tip line anonymously, her voice distorted. "I can't stay quiet anymore. The red list isn't a formal thing, but we all know it. Patients who are difficult, poor, homeless, they get seen last. Their pain isn't treated the same. There's a 2024 study that says we give them fewer IV opioids. We all know it's wrong. What happened to Mr. Rhodes? I charted those stable vitals. I knew he'd been there too long. I'm sorry." The call ended. It was a whistleblower, corroboration from inside the machine. Then Maria found the obituary. It was for Clea Rhodes, died 6 years ago from breast cancer, survived by her husband Michael. A photograph showed a younger, vibrant Michael, clean-shaven, in a suit, his arm around a smiling woman. The man in the hospital bed was a widower. The story was no longer about a medical error. It was about a man who had lost his wife, then his career, then his home, and was nearly lost completely because the system saw the grime and not the grief. It was about a hospital that prioritized liability over life. And it was about a cook and her daughter who, in a single moment of recognition, refused to let a human being vanish. Leo's article was published online at midnight. The headline was simple and devastating: "The Invisible Patient, How a Hospital Left a Former Teacher to Bleed." It named names: Dr. Aris Evans, Cynthia Greer, Mercy General. It cited EMTALA, the research on bias, the anonymous nurse's testimony. It featured Janine's story and a photo of one of Michael's small carved birds, provided by Maria. By 7 a.m., the story was trending locally. By 9 a.m., the hospital board was in emergency session. The regional news stations were calling. Janine's phone, once silent, began to buzz with numbers she didn't recognize: offers for interviews, requests for comment, threats from unknown numbers telling her to back off. The storm had arrived. Michael was still in his bed, slowly healing, as a tempest of accountability swirled outside his door. Janine, sitting in her apartment watching the story spread, realized the battle was no longer just about getting him care. It was about forcing an entire system to answer for the person it had tried to erase. The quiet, stubborn act of seeing someone had ignited a fire, and now they would all have to watch it burn. In the blinding glare of public scrutiny, the carefully constructed walls of protocol and denial at Mercy General began to crumble. The newspaper article was not just a story, it was a catalyst. By noon on the day it was published, the hospital's switchboard was flooded. Community groups organized a silent vigil outside the main entrance. Local news vans, with their satellite antennas raised like mechanical ears, lined the street. The story had tapped into a deep, public nerve: the fear of being invisible, of being judged unworthy of care. Inside the executive suites, the emergency board meeting dissolved into frantic damage control. The hospital's public relations team drafted a statement expressing deep concern and promising a full internal investigation. But it was too late for platitudes. The state's Department of Public Health, alerted by the article, announced it was launching its own investigation into potential violations of the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act. The word EMTALA was now in every follow-up news report, a legal sword hanging over the hospital's reputation. For the individuals at the heart of the storm, the reckoning was personal and profound. Dr. Aris Evans was placed on administrative leave. The hospital needed a sacrificial lamb, and the attending physician who had made the initial non-urgent assessment was the obvious candidate. But the punishment was more than professional. In the quiet of his home, away from the beeping monitors and the hierarchy of the ER, he was forced to confront the bias he had carried. He contacted Maria Flores's nonprofit, not through a lawyer, but personally. He asked to meet with Michael Rhodes. It was a request born not of legal strategy, but of a shattered professional identity. He needed to look the man in the eye and speak the words he'd been trained to never say: "I was wrong, I am sorry." Michael, growing stronger each day, agreed. The meeting took place in a sunny solarium on the hospital's 5th floor, a neutral ground. Dr. Evans entered, stripped of his white coat, looking like any other anxious visitor. Michael sat in a wheelchair, a blanket over his legs. Janine was there, at Michael's request, a silent witness. Dr. Evans did not offer excuses. He did not cite triage protocols or resource constraints. He said, "Mr. Rhodes, I assessed you based on your appearance, not your medical need. I failed you as a physician. I am sorry for the suffering I caused." He then turned to Janine, "And I dismissed you. I used my authority to silence a voice of compassion. That was a failure of character. I am sorry." Michael listened, his gnarled hands resting on the blanket. He was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for saying it," he said finally, his voice still soft but clear. "Now what will you do differently?" It was a teacher's question, cutting to the core of the matter. Dr. Evans, who had spent his career having the answers, had none. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I will find out." Cynthia Greer, the administrator who had demoted Janine and offered the hush money severance, resigned to pursue other opportunities before the week was out. The official statement praised her years of service, but everyone understood it was a fall. The system's defender had been overrun by the truth. For Janine, the whirlwind was terrifying and exhilarating. Her administrative leave was abruptly rescinded. She was reinstated to her full cafeteria duties with an apology and back pay. But the job no longer felt the same. She was no longer invisible Janine from the kitchen. She was Janine Williams, who spoke truth to power. She received a letter from the hospital's new interim CEO, inviting her to join a newly formed patient advocacy review committee, a direct result of the scandal. They wanted her voice at the table, the voice from the ground floor that they had tried to silence. She was skeptical. Was this just another form of containment? Maria Flores advised her to take the seat. Change the machine from the inside, she said. Make them write policies so this never happens to another Michael. But the most important change was happening in room 402 of the recovery wing. With his identity restored, Michael Rhodes was no longer a John Doe liability. He was a patient with a history, a story, and a slowly returning spark. The hospital's discharge planners, now under the microscope, worked with Maria's nonprofit to secure him a bed in a transitional housing facility that included on-site medical support. It wasn't an apartment, but it was a door he could close, a place to heal. The physical healing was one thing, the emotional thaw was another. It was fueled by small, consistent acts of connection. Janine and Keisha visited him every other day. Keisha would present him with new drawings, and he, as his strength returned, began to ask for paper and a pencil. At first, his hands shook too much to hold a line, but slowly, the muscle memory of an art teacher returned. He sketched the view from his window. He drew a portrait of Keisha, her curls a storm of careful circles. One afternoon, he presented Janine with a small, carefully rendered drawing. It was of the park bench under the oak tree, with a figure carving wood and a small child watching. At the bottom, he had written, "For the one who looked." Janine framed it. It hung in their small apartment, a testament to the fact that seeing someone is the first and most radical act of change. The hospital, under legal and public pressure, announced sweeping reforms, mandatory implicit bias training for all clinical staff, a revamped triage protocol that explicitly prohibited factoring housing status or appearance into medical prioritization, the establishment of a patient ombudsman office independent of hospital administration to handle complaints, and a public commitment to adhering to California's Senate Bill 1152, ensuring safe discharge plans for homeless patients. The red list culture, as Nurse Carter had described it, was to be dismantled. It sounded good on press releases. The real test would be in the quiet of the next night shift, with the next disheveled, silent patient who rolled through the doors. But a line had been drawn. A precedent of accountability had been set. Michael was discharged on a bright Tuesday morning, 8 weeks after he was first admitted. The irony of the Tuesday was not lost on him. The day of the week his life had once split in two, now marking a new beginning. Janine and Keisha were there to meet him, along with a social worker from the transitional home. He walked out slowly with a cane, but he walked out on his own 2 feet. He paused at the hospital's main doors, turning to look back at the gleaming, imposing building. "I don't think I'll be carving any birds for this place," he said, a dry, quiet humor in his voice for the first time. Janine laughed, a sound of released tension. "Probably not." The surprising detail, the one that never made the news reports, emerged a month later. With Maria's help, Michael had filed a civil lawsuit against Mercy General Hospital for negligence and violation of his rights under EMTALA. The lawsuit sought damages, but its primary goal, as stated in the filing, was to fund a permanent, endowed position, a patient navigator specifically for homeless and vulnerably housed individuals at Mercy General and other area hospitals. The navigator would be a trained advocate present in the ER to ensure that no patient fell through the cracks of perception. The hospital, facing a losing battle in the court of public opinion, settled before the case went to trial. They agreed to fund the position for 10 years. The man they had tried to discharge to the curb ended up creating a job, that would protect countless others from the same fate. The final scene of this chapter took place back in the park, the one under the old oak tree. It was a Saturday. Michael, stronger now, living in a small studio apartment secured through a Housing First program, sat on his familiar bench. His cane leaned beside him. On a spread-out blanket, Keisha played with a set of wooden blocks he had carved for her, a whole zoo of animals. Janine sat nearby, reading a book, the sunlight dappling through the leaves. A young boy, maybe 7, approached shyly, watching Michael's hands as they smoothed a new piece of wood. "What are you making?" the boy asked. Michael looked up, his eyes calm. "A hawk," he said. "Would you like to learn how?" He patted the space on the bench beside him. The boy sat. Michael placed the knife and wood in the boy's hands, guiding his fingers with his own. It was a simple gesture, a passing on of skill and attention. It was the opposite of everything he had experienced in that bright, sterile hallway where he had been rendered invisible. Janine watched, a soft smile on her face. The system had tried to define Michael by his worst moment, by his dirt and his need. It had tried to define her by her uniform and her place in the hierarchy. But in the end, a child's honest recognition had broken that spell. They had redefined themselves, and in doing so, had forced a powerful institution to redefine its own values. The story doesn't end with everyone living happily ever after. Michael still has bad days. Janine still worries about rent. The hospital's new policies are just words on paper until they are lived. But in that park, with the sound of a knife whispering against wood and a child's focused breathing, there was something undeniable. A connection that had refused to be severed, a dignity that had been reclaimed, and a quiet, stubborn proof that seeing someone is not just an act of kindness, it is an act of justice. And that is where we leave them for now, in the dappled light of a world that is, slowly, being remade by such small, brave acts of sight. We tell stories like this one not because they are rare, but because they reveal a truth we're afraid to admit about our systems and about ourselves. What happened to Michael Rhodes in that bright, sterile hallway wasn't an anomaly. It was the logical endpoint of 1,000 small, unconscious judgments. The research is clear. Homeless patients receive less pain medication, face longer waits, and are discharged faster. They die, on average, 12 years sooner than the general population. This isn't just medicine, it's a moral triage. But this story is also about the antidote. It's about what happens when we choose to see the person instead of the problem. Janine and Keisha didn't have special training or authority. They had only their humanity and the courage to act on it. That's the part of the story that belongs to all of us. Every day, in hospitals, in schools, on the street, we are presented with a choice: to see the category or to see the human being inside it. The system at Mercy General changed because 2 people refused to look away. Policy manuals were rewritten, bias training was implemented, a patient navigator position was created. But paper reforms are only as strong as the people willing to uphold them. The real change happened in the hearts of those involved, in a surgeon's apology, in a nurse's anonymous call, in a cafeteria cook's stubborn insistence that she be heard. So the question this story leaves us with isn't just about healthcare. It's about the invisible triage we all perform. Who do we see? Who do we overlook? And what might happen if, just once, we allowed ourselves to be guided by a child's uncomplicated clarity, by the simple, terrifying act of recognizing another person's pain? If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of a time someone saw you when you felt invisible, or a time you wish you had spoken up, then this channel is for you. We exist to tell these stories, the quiet battles for dignity that almost never make the headlines, the bandage with cartoon stars, the carved wooden bird, the small hand that reaches out in a crowded hallway. These are the moments that quietly remake the world. We believe in the power of these narratives to change more than just a single life, to change the culture itself. If you believe in that too, then become part of this community. Hit subscribe. Share this story with one person who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment below about a moment when someone's kindness surprised you, or when you found the courage to speak up for someone else. We don't shout here, we don't chase algorithms. We sit with the stories that are worth staying for, the ones that remind us of our shared humanity and of the quiet, revolutionary power of simply paying attention. Thank you for listening, thank you for staying. And remember, The next time you walk past someone the world has taught you to ignore, you have a choice. You can choose to see.